All right, so we've been talking about Striketober here in the United States as tens of thousands of American workers have been going on strike to demand better pay, better benefits, better conditions, etc., especially in the face of the ongoing COVID pandemic and the subsequent economic crises that have disproportionately been slamming down on your average worker as the billionaires and capitalist ownership class in this country and around the world continue to expand their wealth by literally trillions of dollars. And so this Striketober phenomenon has been expanding even not only nationwide, but also internationally, as South Korean workers in the tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, went on strike yesterday, and it started on October 20th. It's now October 21st, and this is pretty massive. Okay, so here from Teleteo, absolutely insane. 500,000 workers on general strike today in South Korea to demand more decision-making, power, and rights in the workplace, along with nationalizing various manufacturing industries and socializing healthcare and education. Complete solidarity with them and their cause, and that is to say the least. And I thought it was interesting here because I made a video yesterday where we were talking about Squid Game, which was the show that was created on Netflix by a South Korean creator. And basically the entire point of the show was you have this dynamic which is real in South Korea. It's not just as part of the show, but where thousands and thousands of people, okay, are significantly burdened by massive amounts of debt. And the situation has gotten really dire for a lot of these people. And so that was reflected in the show Squid Game. And you see people who are participating in this general strike are literally wearing some of the outfits that were worn in Squid Game, drawing some of the similarities there. And obviously Squid Game was a pretty accurate reflection of the actual dire situation that is going on among South Korea's working class. And you see here, I've seen estimates anywhere from 100,000 to 500,000 that actually showed up for this yesterday. But you can see here from the pictures, substantial amount of people that are showing out and showing solidarity with their fellow comrades. And so I wanted to give you some of the details here in terms of what they were actually fighting for, what led up to this, what are the historical conditions that set place for this type of thing to take place in South Korea. And so this is a really good article that I was reading on it, and I really haven't been able to find many different articles on this internationally or here in the United States. And so this was one that I think covers pretty much all of the bases really well. So I'm going to link it down in the description below if you want to read it in its entirety. But I basically highlighted a number of things that I thought were the most important parts of this. And of course, living in the United States, not only should we be showing solidarity with these workers internationally across the world, no matter what country it is, but also in a country like South Korea that the United States, our imperialist institutions have been involved in deeply with over the last number of decades. So it's not just that I am an American talking about something happening on the opposite end of the world. We actually do, as Americans, have a direct role, or at least our government has had a direct role in creating some of the economic conditions that they are facing today. So without further ado, let's get into some of the details here. So 500,000 South Korean workers walk off jobs in general strike. So on October 20th, at least 500,000 workers in South Korea from across the construction, transportation service, and other sectors are walking off their jobs in a one-day general strike. The strike will be followed by mass demonstrations in urban centers and rural farmlands, culminating in a national all-people's mobilization in January of 2022. So we got a little something there to look forward to. But the Korean Confederation of Trade Unions, the KCTU, the country's largest labor union umbrella with 1.1 million members, is organizing these mobilizations in a broad-based front with South Korea's urban poor and farmers. And the 15 detailed demands of the strike can be summarized as fitting within three basic areas. Number one, abolish irregular work or part-time, temporary, or contract labor with little to no benefits and extend labor protections to all workers. So this is pretty much like what we call here in the United States the gig economy, okay? And we have a substantial portion of our workforce that is now working in the gig economy. And of course, you don't get any benefits. You don't get fair pay. You don't even have the ability to collectively organize with your fellow workers if you are a gig worker. And so, of course, this is what the capitalist ownership class wants, specifically companies like Uber, like DoorDash, etc., all of these other companies that have gig employees. They want them to be divided. They want them to be classified as independent contractors instead of as full employees, so that they do not have the ability to collectively organize, so that they do not even get the bare minimum of fair pay and fair benefits, etc. And so we have some similarities there here between South Korea and the United States. And their number two demand is give workers power in the economic restructuring decisions during times of crises. Obviously, again, we have some pretty massive overlap between South Korea and the United States. I mean, could you imagine if we had democratically been able to decide what had happened after the 2008 recession, instead of bailing out all of these massive banks who completely tanked the economy with their criminal practices, instead of letting them walk free with millions and millions of dollars, we perhaps could have seen some of them actually face jail time for the crimes that they were responsible for, and actually engaged in an economic bottom-up response to that crisis. But this is a great thing if they actually get it, give workers power in economic restructuring times during moments of crises. Obviously, the pandemic would be another one of those moments of crises. But number three, nationalize key industries and socialize basic services like education and housing. And housing is a really big one in South Korea. Their speculative real estate markets have completely destroyed the ability for average people to have access to sustainable housing. And they continue here with South Korea today, overworked and insecure. So just to give you a perspective on the dire situation in South Korea, they say today South Korea ranks third in highest annual working hours, and as of 2015 it was third in workplace deaths among member countries of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, otherwise known as the OECD. And over 40% of all workers are considered irregular workers, as in the US. Many of these irregular workers labor in the gig economy, beholden to the tech giants' apps, again, like I said, Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, etc. And with an economy and society dominated by corporate conglomerates known as Chaebol or Chaebol, not sure how to pronounce that, but I'm sure that I'm butchering it. But South Korean people face an increasingly bleak prospects, and the top 10% of earners claimed 45% of the total income in 2016. And real estate speculation has led to a housing crisis, and privatization in education and healthcare are expanding disparities. Of course, we know exactly what that is like here as Americans, right? The privatization of a healthcare system, the for-profit nature of a healthcare system does absolutely nothing but potentially bankrupt and cost average people thousands and thousands of dollars in many cases, just for the sole purpose of creating or expanding the profit margins of these massive health insurance companies and big pharma companies. Okay, we are getting screwed over, as are South Koreans. But they continue saying that as South Korea undergoes blowback from the effects of COVID-19 on the global economy, these crises have only sharpened, and demystifying South Korea's rise. So this is a little bit of the historical perspective. You just got the current perspective of where they are at right now. Now, here's a little bit as to how we got to this position in South Korea. So, often hailed as a miracle on the Han River, the story of economic development in South Korea has always had its winners and losers. 40 years of US-backed right-wing dictatorship set the political conditions for the growth of the South Korean industry. Again, I told you guys, as Americans, we not only have a role in showing international solidarity with workers across the world, but also we have literally, our government historically has played a role in getting them to the economic conditions that they are in today and still are in today. And that story is for another time, but a general description still paints a chilling picture. Participation in the Vietnam War, the separation of families and sale of children through the transnational adoption system, state management of a sex industry catered to occupying U.S. troops, and decades of martial law and anti-communist state terror all played their parts in the rise of the Chaebol, and the confrontation between labor and capital brewing in South Korea today is another chapter in this bloody history. And since the Chun Doo-hwan dictatorship of the 1980s, neoliberal reforms sounds a lot pretty familiar here. Pretty much the Reagan era, right, of neoliberal reforms here in the United States as well, have gradually stripped away South Korea's protectionist policies, opening its markets and resources to foreign investors at the expense of workers. And by the mid-1990s, South Korea received a rush of $100 billion in foreign loans. And when the 1997 Asian financial crisis hit, the economy quickly deflated as foreign capital withdrew. And with national bankruptcy looming, South Korea was forced to turn to another imperialist institution led by the hegemonic economic control of the United States, the International Monetary Fund, for assistance. But the IMF loan, of course, came with strings attached, and structural adjustment policies dismantled hard-won worker protections. Public corporations were privatized, and domestic markets were pried open for foreign capital, which returned to devour cheap Korean assets. And by 2004, up to 44% of South Korea's total stock market capitalization was owned by foreigners, mostly from the US, the EU, and Japan. So again, not anything like secret or that we haven't seen before here. These IMF loans, this is how they weaponize. This is why I call it even an imperialist institution. The IMF is how we do basically our economic imperialism. We have our military imperialism, we have our economic imperialism. This is the tool, the institution that we use to basically inflict suffering on other countries in exchange for, giving them a little bit of foreign capital to boost some investments in their industries. But of course, there are also going to be trade-offs to that. Namely, if we are going to give you investments to be able to boost your own industry or save your own economy, you are then going to have to allow U.S. corporations to exploit your resources, exploit your labor forces, etc. That's always the deal with the devil that you are making with the IMF. But they continue saying that the 1997 crisis and its aftermath ultimately led to mass layoffs, the irregularization of South Korean workers, and the doubling of poverty rates in a single decade. And despite an ostensible democratic transition in the late 1980s, the South Korean people have no ownership of South Korea's economy, and the average household's debt amount to almost double their annual income. Let me say that again, okay? And this kind of ties into that Squid Game concept that we were just talking about of massive amounts of debt that South Korean people are holding. The average household's debts amount to almost double their annual income. Okay, this is like incomparable to any other country that I really know in the developed world, but this is just like absolutely massive amounts of debt that are being held. And 64 chaebols, again, sorry if I'm butchering that, but claim 84% of the GDP and yet provide only 10% of the jobs. And in fact, the average South Korean has less say in government than US corporations, who basically determine our entire legislative agenda, which have power under the 2007 US-Korea free trade agreement to legally contest laws that they find unfavorable. So literally, US corporations getting to partly at least determine some of the laws in the South Korean economy. So our corporations here in the United States, these international corporate conglomerates or whatever you want to call them, they have more control over South Korea's legislative agenda than, not, you know, similarly to how they have control over the US legislative agenda, they also have control over other countries' legislative agendas via, again, lots of these economic imperialist methods that the US uses to exploit the resources of other countries. But they continue down here with, I think, some other important information in terms of the context of how this all developed. You just got a little bit of the historical context, but they continue here saying that South Korean workers see COVID-19 as a turning point. This ongoing pandemic nearly halted the movement of people and created bottlenecks in the global supply chain, and workers worry about how economic effects of the climate crisis and the digital transformation of industries could leave them on the losing end of a new economy. And they say, quote, in times of crisis, the forces that successfully respond to the demands of the times will lead the new era, says Lee. The KCTU's demands exceed improving the conditions for its members. They are fighting for workers' power as a class and demanding their share of the wealth they create. And for this, the workers expect to pay a heavy price. The South Korean state has already responded with preemptive repression, jailing of the KCTU president Yang Kyung-soo and at least 30 other union organizers, according to Lee. And as strikers walk out of their jobs, Lee expects that the government and the companies to respond as they have in the past by jailing other union leaders and fining and suing workers for their activities. And of course, this is why it is important for us to discuss these things. This is why these workers and a lot of these other labor organizing groups in South Korea are specifically asking for videos like this to be made. Okay, not patting myself on the back in any way, but it's important for us to show solidarity with these workers internationally, because again, it's not just showing solidarity with an international workforce, which is something we should do as socialists, okay, no matter what country that they are in. We are all comrades with these workers internationally. More so, you are more connected to any worker around the world than you are with your average Jeff Bezos or Bill Gates. Okay, it doesn't matter what country that they are in, but especially in a country like South Korea, that the United States, via again our economic or our militaristic imperialist ventures, have had a direct effect on the economic conditions that the workers in South Korea are facing. So we kind of have a responsibility to talk about the details of what is going on, and hopefully they get the concessions that they are actually asking for. And yeah, it's important for us to shine a light on this so that there isn't that level of brutality necessarily, or if there is brutality in response to a general strike like this, that the entire international community is ready to push back against that. So yeah, basically that's what's happening in South Korea right now. I will continue to make videos on this if we have any major updates, but all solidarity to these workers. I hope that they get everything that they are demanding.